everyone. Thanks for coming today. So I really appreciate you all coming, and I think that it's a really timely discussion. I think over time, people have gotten really concerned about qualified immunity, and we have a really great panel to talk about it. So I think we all kind of agree that, police officers, as long as they exist, should be equipped to carry out their duties and perform their jobs. But is qualified immunity the thing we need to let them do that? According to the Cato Institute, the Supreme Court doctrine of qualified immunity was only invented in 1982 and by the court itself. It shields police and government officials from civil suits by making plaintiffs show that the illegality of the misconduct was clearly established. But that means cases of new and inventive misconduct can't come to court. So first I want to start off by asking everyone, what are your broad thoughts or concerns about qualified immunity? And are there any particular examples that you have to show why it does or doesn't work?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start because we're doing left to right from their angle. I would say no, it obviously doesn't work. And I want to take a step back on how we even had this happen in the first place. So in 1871, they passed the Civil Rights Act of 1871, which provided that, among other things, if it was established that an employee of government had violated your rights and broken the law, you could sue them for compensation, or your survivors could sue them for compensation if it resulted in them killing you. Then starting in the 1950s and 1960s, the courts started qualifying that and started saying, well, we need to make sure it's clearly established, and then ending finally in 1982 with what we now consider the bulk of qualified immunity, which is the idea that even after it has already been established in court that the officer or CPS worker or employee of whatever, government employee of whatever kind, clearly broke the law and violated your rights, they will then determine when it comes to civil court whether they really knew and meant to do that. That's something that's not applied to any of us. If it's already been established we broke the law, we don't get to say, Your Honor, I'm not a constitutional scholar. I didn't know that I couldn't kill that guy for no reason. It doesn't work that way, and yet we give them that protection. We can get into, I'm sure later, examples, like very clear examples of how that whole clearly established thing is misused. But just to start off, no, it clearly doesn't work unless actually it does work, because what its intention is to protect agents of government when they blatantly violate our rights. So from that matter, it works, but it doesn't work for what we would want it to.
Yes, good morning. My perspective is that qualified immunity, as it is currently practiced, is a very bad thing. However, I must say there is a certain sense, like so many arguments with which I have to deal in my putting my libertarian hat on, there is a little kernel of something valid in terms of qualified immunity. I'm not sure that we can actually work out qualified immunity so that little kernel can actually be preserved. It very well may be that we just have to get rid of it totally. The biggest problem is that, from what I can tell, after the 1982 case, which followed on Pearson versus Ray in 1967, that the point about essentially the behavior has to violate clearly established law. I actually think that's not unreasonable. The problem is that courts have interpreted it in what I consider to be a remarkably unreasonable fashion. In fact, now it seems what many courts see as reasonable means it's not facially laughable. And so I think that there has to be a complete reevaluation of qualified immunity, whether there is anything part of it that can actually be salvaged. I'm not sure, given the nature of both the legislative and judicial processes.
The reason why qualified immunity doesn't work, and the reason why Jim says there's a lot of bad to it, is because the problem with it isn't the immunity part. It's the qualified part. Qualified immunity assumes that our police officers are the best trained, the best paid, and will have the best technology and the best practices
Yeah.
to do their job efficiently, effectively, and safely for themselves and the community. And that's just not the case. Many officers around the country, and it's not just in Alabama, which is where I'm from, it's around the country. Many officers have to work a second job when they're not being police officers, just to earn enough money to make a living to support their families. Do we need to ask ourselves as a society, if we're going to offer qualified immunity, or if we're going to want good, effective policing, are we willing to pay for that? Pay for pay professional salaries so that they can focus their full-time attention, professional attention, on being an officer, being a police officer, and being the best police officer they can be? Or are we going to keep cutting corners and cutting costs and getting these guys that aren't qualified to be a police officer? For example, to illustrate that point, the qualified is the problem with qualified immunity. Derek Chauvin was a field trainer for the Minneapolis Police Department when he had his knee on the neck of George Floyd. If those are the type of people that are training our officers of today and tomorrow, we need to get better trainers. And the only way we're going to get better trainers is if we pay them better, provide them with better technology to do their jobs safely and effectively, and make sure that they are trained to the best of their ability. Because right now, officers, you practice what you want to be good at in your profession. Shoshana, you're a policy, you work for a policy institute at the R Street Institute. You study policy all the time because that's what you want to be good at. Spike, you're a politician. You want to be good at speaking.
Talk a lot, yeah.
So you practice at speaking a lot. The police officers around the country, what do they spend most of their time training? Firearm training at the range, training with their less than lethal weaponry, and physical takedown methods when they're training. We're as a society extremely lucky if they may receive de-escalation training once a quarter. More like once a year they get that de-escalation training, and it's just a seminar where they go in a room like this, sit down and listen to somebody speak, and then they'll forget it 5 minutes after they walk out the door. We need to take a long, strong, hard look at our pay and our training to make sure that if we're going to have qualified immunity, that they have the best tools necessary to do it.
So this leads me into my next question, actually. At the R Street Institute, we love insurance as a solution. We were founded on insurance. Makes for a really fun job, getting to talk about flood insurance and stuff all the time. But this actually leads to, what about police insurance, or what about better training? In each of your views, I'd be curious what you think the best model is. Is it maintaining qualified immunity and adding insurance? Is it getting rid of it or changing it and fixing training? Or is it some combination of those and something else?
Yeah, so that actually goes directly into what I was hoping to be able to talk about next, which is, that's a good job. Wow, great moderator. The reality is, you're not going to see the increased professionalism and the improved conduct, much less addressing the culture by which those bad apples spoil the apple cart. You're never going to see an end to that as long as no one's being held liable when they do the wrong thing. There is no incentive for them to do the right thing, or there's no disincentive for them to do the wrong thing. And so naturally what's going to happen when qualified immunity is ended, and when now those individual officers can be sued, now it's no longer if something terrible happens, the victims just sue the city and the police department and get a settlement that you, the taxpayer, pay for. Now they can sue the individual officers, they can sue their commanders, they can sue potentially the departments themselves, they can sue the actual people that are involved in it and go after their pensions and everything and leave them penniless and clear that out instead of clearing us out every time it happens. And what's naturally going to happen there is, obviously, insurance is going to be the next thing. For the same reason that doctors have insurance and every other profession has insurance, because they don't get immunity if they do the wrong thing, even accidentally. In this case, there's going to have to be some kind of insurance or bonding, which means that officers who have proven that they're going to be a liability, that they're going to have lawsuits against them, they're not going to get hired. They're not going to be hireable. And that will end the practice of the officer getting fired here and rehired 2 states over. That will end that, because no one will want to touch if for no other reason, they don't want to touch the fiscal liability of having them on the force. And so that will necessarily bring about a lot of changes both to the culture and the policies and training of these officers, so that they're making sure the apples don't go bad. And if they find some apples that are bad, I'm using the bad apple analogy because that's what always gets thrown at us, but when the apples do get bad, we get them out of the cart so they're not spoiling the whole culture there. And that is only going to come, even if they get additional funding, even if they get additional training, the actual increased professionalism and respect for our rights and education and training that they need is only going to come if there is a disincentive for them to be bad cops.
Ditto, my distinguished colleague. I think, as usual, he's correct. Let me note, by the way, before I give a fuller answer, let me pay tribute to Jay Schweikert of the Cato Institute, who in 2020 provided a very nice policy report on the general subject of qualified immunity. I suggest for those of you who are really interested, please read his report, because I think it's very, very good. Mr. Schweikert points out that indeed, if qualified immunity were to go away whole hog, there would be the opportunity for organizations, municipalities, state governments to be able to buy insurance in the marketplace for the purpose of protecting officers who, if they are legitimately engaged in actions that can pass muster under constitutional scrutiny, they will be able to seek insurance. Yeah. And the insurance mechanism will provide some sort of discipline. Right now, a lot of actors who are engaging under color of law, they're basically playing a game of heads they win, tails they break even, which is very bad. Right. Let me also note, because I think it's important for us to realize that the issue of qualified immunity is not just for the issue of police officers. It also extends to issues of judicial action as well as prosecutorial action. And I think that sometimes, precisely because the horrible examples are ones where cops are caught really being very, very bad to people, we forget that an enormous amount of the issue of bad behavior for which qualified immunity supposedly does it, deals with judicial misconduct and prosecutorial misconduct.
And I know it's your turn, David. I just want to fill one. It also includes other workers in the government. We're dealing, my nonprofit, You Are the Power, is dealing with a cause in Georgia where a family is being torn apart by DFACS, the Department of Family and Children's Services in the state of Georgia. It is basically CPS workers who just, they see a kid with a newborn baby with tiny fractures in their legs, and they decide to ignore the doctor's reports that say that it's because she has a chronic medical condition that causes fractures. And they go, oh, well, this could be abuse, so we're just going to take the children and criminally charge both the parents and not allow them to live together and not allow them to see their children. And it was because they couldn't be bothered to do their actual job. They get qualified immunity. When we win on that case, when they drop all the charges, we've already gotten where they're allowed to see their kids again, but when all the charges are dropped and now it'll be time for them to pursue a suit, it will almost inevitably end with the state of Georgia giving them a taxpayer settlement, because every single one of those people who harmed them all the way up that chain of command have qualified immunity.
Insurance definitely needs to be a part of the solution to either reform or end qualified immunity, and here's why. Insurance companies' sole motive in existing is to make money. And I like to use this example when talking about insurance companies. So they actually invest time, resources, and effort into researching on how to, whatever they're insuring, make it safer and better so that they don't have to pay out insurance settlements. For example, after Hurricane Ivan and Katrina came through, the homeowners insurance companies got together. In the state of Alabama, we developed what's called a fortified home roof program. You got gold, silver, and bronze fortified roofs with different levels of protection. And the insurance company is like, great, if you rebuild your houses or rebuild your roofs to these standards, we'll offer you discounts on insurance premiums because it's going to be better for us. We're not going to have to pay out payouts. The Hurricane Sally was the last hurricane to hit our area, And you could, one of the state senators from that represents the Gulf Shores, Orange Beach area, he said you could literally fly in a helicopter and you could see which homes had certified or fortified roofs and which ones didn't, because and that's a market-based solution that insurance companies came up with and incentivized to do. People to not only make their homes safer for themselves, but also a less of an insurance risk for the insurance company. Yeah. They do the same thing with automobiles. Well, a lot of these safety features that we have in automobiles nowadays, with automatic braking, blindside alerts, and all this other stuff, airbags and seatbelts, came from pressure from the insurance companies. So the insurance companies can and will do the same thing with police malpractice insurance, which is what that would be. And they can go to police departments. They can say, if this is your training program and this is how you train your officers, and then we can offer you discounts on your insurance rates. And cities, smart cities, would be like, great, let's save some money and let's do this.
You know, one funny thing is, I think similar to other kinds of insurance, this would actually probably have to be run like you're saying, by private companies rather than by the state. Like the National Flood Insurance program has its problems because it's run by the state and it doesn't account for risk quite the same way and stuff. It's just funny you had me thinking about that. I'm sure you all are very excited about hearing about insurance, but actually when you get into it, there's some really cool stuff it can do. I wanted to highlight that though, just as unfortunately an insurance nerd where I've ended up in life. One question I wanted to get to that I think that it stumps a lot of people, and it kind of stops a lot of people from engaging in this debate. And I'd really be curious to hear from you all your best reason why either modifying or getting rid of qualified immunity wouldn't stop police officers from doing scary things, like from being able to stop murderers, from having to kill when they have to kill sometimes. Like how wouldn't this, I know you're not supposed to ask questions like that, but how wouldn't this cause problems that way?
Yeah, so that's already covered. It's called scope of duty. So I've had a lot of police officers and firefighters and paramedics and people like that who've come to me at my events or reached out to me online and said, you know, I'm being told that if qualified immunity ends, if I'm, pulling someone out of a burning building and they get glass in their arm and it gets infected and the arm has to be amputated, I'm going to get sued for that. Or if I'm, pull someone over and they start fighting me and I fight back and they fall and, break their jaw, I'm going to get sued for that. Or, all these other examples. And I say no, and I give them examples of court cases where that's covered under scope of duty. Qualified immunity is when it has already been established that the government employee or agent in question already broke the law and violated someone's rights. So they got to do scary things, but at no point does their doing a scary thing give them the right to violate your rights, right? We don't have the right to violate people's rights, so we can't give that right, bestow that right upon someone else. So clearly they can't do that. But if they have to do something scary and it causes someone else to get harmed and it's established that they had to do it, well, then they never even have to invoke qualified immunity, and that's already the case. And here's how insane the entire idea of clearly established is. When they say clearly established, they take that to mean that the exact same thing you did had to already have been established prior to when you did it in court, that to have been illegal and to have violated the Constitution, violated someone's rights, in that federal judicial district. Not in America, in just that district. And here's how insane, I'll give you 3 examples of just how insane that is. There was a case where officers had someone arrested. He was sitting on the curb, he was already handcuffed, and they decided to have one of their canines maul him a little bit, just for fun. And they got qualified immunity, even though that exact type of thing had already happened in that district, because in the other case, the guy was lying down, he wasn't sitting on the curb. They were both handcuffed, but one was lying down, one was sitting up. There was another case where 2 prison workers were tasing a man that was in custody, that was in a cell, no harm to anyone. I think they were just doing it to amuse themselves, but for whatever reason, they got qualified immunity, even though something similar had happened in that district, because in the other case, they had used tear gas and not a taser. Then there was a case where officers stole, I think, $200,000 or $300,000 worth of coins, and they got qualified immunity for stealing, even though other officers had also been caught stealing in that district, because in the other case it was cash and not, coins, and so it wasn't legal tender. That's what clearly established looked like. That's what qualified immunity looks like.
As a big fan of Tom Sowell, who reminds us that in so many cases in human affairs, we don't have solutions, we have trade-offs. And there's no way that you're going to have any sort of rule, law, regulation that's going to keep bad people from doing bad things. And I think we have to realize what the trade-offs are. And qualified immunity is currently interpreted. I think it's certainly the very bad trade-off, and I think that we can improve. One point, if I may, and I've got to do this. I think if we were to adopt a much more libertarian perspective on what should be illegal or criminal, if we got rid of so many laws that criminalize private behavior, so many of these situations just wouldn't occur. So again, an overarching point is if we don't have so many things that are criminal because they don't actually involve rights violated behavior, many of these problems are going to go away, or at least to be of a much lower level of difficulty.
100%.
Medical malpractice laws and liability doesn't stop surgeons from performing surgery. It stops them from performing surgeries drunk, well, most of them, or high on drugs, or most of them, because every time a surgeon cuts into somebody for a surgery, even be a minor surgery or a major surgery to remove cancer, they run the risk of their patient dying on the table. If they do everything right, follow their training, and they might get sued because their patient died, but their insurance company is going to defend them because they did everything right, and if they followed their training. If they don't follow their training and they do stuff wrong, like perform surgery drunk or high, and their insurance companies may cut the people that sue them a check. But then, the next thing that insurance company's going to do, drop them like a bag of rocks because it's too much of a liability for them. They become uninsurable, as Spike spoke of earlier. So just doing away with qualified immunity or making it tougher to get qualified immunity isn't going to stop cops from being able to do their jobs effectively. It's just going to hold them more accountable under the law when they do something wrong.
Yeah.
The last question I have, because we only have about a minute left, but I'd be curious if any of you believe that they should have a level of immunity, but just a modified, or if you're all like, basically everything without qualified immunity is enough and that works and you don't need anything additional.
If it's in their scope of duty and they had to do it and they didn't violate anyone's rights, then I think that should cover it. And I don't think there needs to be anything additional because their jobs can be scary. Loggers' jobs can be scary. I think the people most likely to die while working are like pizza delivery drivers. Like their jobs are scary. All of us could potentially have a scary job if we're interacting with the public. Who here has ever worked in retail? Okay, yeah. So that can get scary. But you don't get to like beat the person up because they didn't comply when you told them to put the shirt back or whatever, or to whatever. But they shouldn't have special protections just because their job is scary. There are a lot of scary jobs.
I mean, under common law, there are protections against situations where people, as you say, scope of duty. There are common law protections, and I don't think that again the entire panoply of things associated with qualified immunity, we don't need them.
No.
And I agree with those two guys that we don't need qualified immunity because we already have immunity in place for officers and public officials that do their jobs and do their jobs as well, and they're to very well and do it with a kind heart and a servant's heart, and just having qualified immunity just basically allows the bad apples, as Spike likes to say, go in there and ruin the reputation of a police department.
Definitely. Thank you. I think we're out of time, or at least that's what the clock says. I'm ruled by the clock. I don't have any special instructions beyond the clock. So I'd like to give everyone a round of applause for knowing so much more than I do on the subject.